"Daddy, can we stop them?" A little girl's desperate whisper in a crowded mall as her single dad steps between a terrified woman and 4 raging men. But what happens the next week will shatter everything you thought you knew about Heroes. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow across Ethan Cole's bedroom. He stirred from his sleep as he felt the familiar weight of small feet climbing onto his bed. A smile touched his lips before he even opened his eyes. "Daddy?" Abby's whisper was gentle, her voice carrying that mix of hesitation and need that always tugged at his heart. Ethan rolled over to face his daughter, taking in her tousled brown hair and pajamas decorated with colorful unicorns, the ones they'd picked out together last Christmas. "Hey, sweetheart, what's got you up so early?" Abby snuggled closer, her small hand finding his. "I had a dream about Mommy." The words hung in the air for a moment. Ethan's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Want to tell me about it?" "She was in the garden, like before," Abby said, her eyes focused on their joined hands. "The one with all the yellow flowers she loved. She was smiling, Daddy, but when I tried to hug her, I woke up." Ethan pulled her closer, letting her rest her head on his shoulder. The familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo reminded him so much of Sarah, who used to buy the same brand. "Your mom loved you more than anything in this whole world, Abby. You know that, right?" "I know." Abby's voice was small. "But sometimes, I get scared that I'll forget what she looked like." "That won't happen," Ethan assured her, running his hand over her hair. "We have all those photos in the living room and the videos from your birthday parties. Plus," he tapped her nose gently, "you have her smile. Every time you laugh, I see her." Abby looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you promise you won't ever leave me too, Daddy?" The question pierced Ethan's heart. He gathered her even closer, his voice firm and sure. "I promise I will always be here for you, sweetheart. Always. You're stuck with your old dad whether you like it or not." This earned him a giggle, the sound warming the room. "You're not that old, Daddy." "Oh no." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Tell that to my knees when I try to keep up with you at the park." Abby's giggles grew louder, and Ethan felt the heavy moment lifting. He glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m. An idea formed in his mind. "Hey, what do you say we do something special today?" he suggested. "Maybe some back-to-school shopping?" Abby's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we get those light-up sneakers we saw in the window last week?" "We'll see," Ethan said, already knowing he'd probably give in. "But first, how about some breakfast? I'm thinking pancakes with chocolate chips?" Abby bounced on the bed, her earlier sadness forgotten. "Is there any other way to make them?" Ethan pushed back the covers and stood up, stretching. "Race you to the kitchen." In the warm, sunny kitchen, Ethan moved with practiced ease, gathering ingredients while Abby perched on her favorite stool at the counter. The familiar routine of measuring flour, cracking eggs, and mixing batter felt comforting, like a weekend ritual that connected them. "Can I add the chocolate chips?" Abby asked, already reaching for the bag. "Go for it, Chef." Ethan watched as she carefully sprinkled them into the batter, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "Just don't eat them all before they make it to the pancakes." "I would never," Abby protested, even as she popped one into her mouth with a mischievous grin. As the first pancake sizzled on the griddle, Ethan found himself humming one of Sarah's favorite songs. It was something she used to do while cooking, and the habit had stuck with him. "That's Mommy's song," Abby observed, her voice warm with recognition. "Sure, Island." Ethan flipped the pancake with a flourish. "Remember how she used to dance around the kitchen with you when you were little?" "Uh-huh. And you would pretend you couldn't dance. But then she'd make you join in anyway." They shared a laugh at the memory, and Ethan felt that familiar bittersweet ache in his chest. But it wasn't as sharp as it used to be. Now it came with a warmth, a gratitude for the memories they shared. After breakfast, they got ready for their shopping trip. Abby changed into her favorite purple dress, the one Sarah had picked out for her last birthday, while Ethan cleaned up the kitchen. "Ready to go, kiddo," he called up the stairs. "Coming!" Abby thundered down, her excitement evident in every step. "Can we listen to the radio in the car?" "You bet." Ethan grabbed his keys and wallet. "But remember our deal about those sneakers? You have to keep your room clean for a whole month." "I will. I promise." Abby bounced on her toes as they headed to the car. Cross my heart. As they pulled out of the driveway, Abby reached for the radio dial, finding the station that always seemed to play Sarah's favorite songs. Sure enough, one of them came on, and Abby started humming along, her small voice carrying the familiar melody. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart full. The morning sun caught her hair just right, making it shine like Sarah's used to. She looked so much like her mother in that moment. The same gentle spirit, the same capacity for joy even after sadness. They drove toward the mall, the music filling the car with memories and hope. Abby's humming grew more confident with each note, and Ethan found himself joining in softly, their voices blending together just as they always had. A small family, maybe, but one filled with love. The song that had meant so much to Sarah played on as they made their way through the quiet Saturday morning streets, carrying them toward their simple adventure together. The weekend crowd filled the mall's wide corridors, a steady stream of shoppers flowing past gleaming storefronts. Ethan guided Abby through the throng with a gentle hand on her shoulder, watching her eyes light up at each window display they passed. "Can we go to the shoe store first?" Abby asked, bouncing on her toes. Her dark curls, so much like her mother's, danced with each movement. "That's the plan, kiddo." Ethan smiled down at her. "Those old sneakers of yours are practically talking." "They are not," Abby giggled, but looked down at her well-worn shoes. "Okay, maybe a little." The shoe store buzzed with back-to-school shoppers. Abby made her way to the children's section, her fingers trailing along boxes of colorful sneakers. Ethan watched as she studied each pair with serious consideration, just like Sarah used to do. The thought caught in his chest. These little moments when his daughter mirrored her mother still took him by surprise. "What about these?" Abby held up a pair of purple sneakers with silver stars. "Those look perfect." Ethan sat beside her on the low bench. As she tried them on, he noticed how her profile matched Sarah's. The same gentle slope of her nose, the same determined set to her chin. She was growing so fast, transforming more each day into a beautiful blend of both her parents. "They feel great." Abby stood, taking a few experimental jumps. "Like I'm walking on clouds." After paying for the shoes, they headed toward the bookstore. Abby had already finished her summer reading list and was eager for new adventures. The familiar scent of fresh paper and coffee greeted them as they entered the store. "Remember, just one book today," Ethan reminded her, though they both knew he'd probably cave if she found two she really wanted. I know. Abby skipped toward the middle grade section, leaving Ethan to browse nearby. He was thumbing through a mystery novel when the first loud voice cut through the quiet atmosphere. Harsh words carried from the reference section, followed by mocking laughter. Ethan's head snapped up, parental instincts instantly alert. "Come on, sweetheart. We just want to talk." A male voice, thick with false sweetness. "Please leave me alone." A woman's voice, steady but strained. "I need to get back to work." Ethan moved toward the sound, his heart rate picking up. Through the gaps in the shelving, he could see 4 young men surrounding a female clerk. She was backed against the reference desk, her name tag catching the light. Lena. Though her face remained composed, her hands trembled as she clutched a stack of books to her chest like a shield. "Don't be like that," another man said, leaning closer. "We came all this way just to see you." The smallest of the group shifted to block the aisle's exit. Their body language spoke of predatory intent, their smirks growing as they watched Lena's discomfort. Ethan felt Abby appear at his side, her small hand slipping into his. She must have heard the commotion, too. His first instinct was to pull her away, to shield her from this ugly scene. But before he could move, she tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy?" Her whisper was barely audible, but her eyes were clear and determined as she looked up at him. "Can we stop them?" The simple question hit him like a physical force. In his daughter's face, he saw Sarah's courage, her unwavering sense of right and wrong. The same qualities he'd fallen in love with, the same strength he hoped to nurture in their child. Lena's voice shook now as she tried again to push past the men. "I've asked you repeatedly to leave." One of them reached for her arm. "Just give us a chance." Ethan squeezed Abby's hand once, then let go. His pulse thundered in his ears as he stepped around the bookshelf. Years of quiet living, of keeping his head down and focusing on raising his daughter. None of that mattered now. What mattered was showing Abby that good people step forward when others need help. What mattered was doing what Sarah would have done without hesitation. He drew himself up to his full height, shoulders squared, and moved toward the group. His hands were steady, even as his heart pounded against his ribs. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the scene as he prepared to confront the men, knowing this moment would change everything. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped between Lena and the 4 young men. His fingers tightened protectively around Abby's small hand. The tallest of the group, barely out of his teens with spiky black hair and a torn leather jacket, sneered at the interruption. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I think the lady would appreciate if you gave her some space." "Mind your own business, old man," the leader shot back. His friend snickered, spreading out slightly. Lena stood pressed against the bookshelf, her face pale but grateful for the intervention. Her name tag caught the fluorescent light as she clutched a stack of books to her chest like a shield. "I'm making it my business," Ethan replied firmly. He gently guided Abby behind him while maintaining eye contact with the group. "There are children present, and you're disturbing everyone in the store." The leader, Derek, according to the patch on his jacket, took a step forward. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Other shoppers had begun to notice the confrontation. A mother hurried her young son toward the exit. An elderly man near the magazine rack pulled out his phone, likely calling security. "I'm not going to do anything," Ethan said calmly. "But I suggest you leave now before security arrives. This doesn't need to escalate." Derek's face darkened. "You threatening me?" "No threats, just facts." Ethan felt Abby squeeze his hand tighter. He thought of the promise he'd made her that morning, to always keep her safe. That promise extended to protecting others when he could. "You've got some nerve." Derek started forward, but one of his friends grabbed his arm. "Dude, security's coming," the friend muttered, nodding toward the store entrance where 2 uniformed guards were approaching quickly. The mall security officers, both broad-shouldered men in their 30s, positioned themselves on either side of the group. "Is there a problem here?" the taller guard asked, his hand resting meaningfully on his radio. Derek shrugged off his friend's grip, glaring at Ethan. "No problem. We were just leaving." "Good choice," the second guard said. "We'll escort you to the exit." As the guards led the 4 young men away, Derek looked back over his shoulder. His eyes moved from Ethan to Lena, then to Abby, before the guards urged him forward. The tension in the bookstore dissolved like a popped balloon. Several customers who had been watching broke into spontaneous applause. Ethan felt his face grow warm at the attention. Lena set down her armload of books and pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice catching. Tears gleamed in her brown eyes. "They've been hanging around for days, getting worse each time." "My daddy's the bravest," Abby declared proudly, emerging from behind Ethan to beam up at Lena. "He always helps people who need it." Lena managed a watery smile. "Yes, he certainly is brave." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm Lena. I can't tell you how grateful I am." "Ethan Cole," he replied. "And this is my daughter, Abby. Are you okay? Should we call the police?" "The security team will file a report," Lena said, straightening her blue cardigan with still shaking fingers. "They've been wonderful about increasing patrols since those boys started loitering around." A store manager hurried over, apologizing profusely to both Lena and Ethan. The remaining customers gradually returned to their browsing, though several stopped to pat Ethan on the shoulder or murmur words of approval as they passed. "Can we look at books now, Daddy?" Abby asked, tugging at his sleeve. The excitement seemed to have rolled right off her in that resilient way children had. "Of course, sweetheart." Ethan turned back to Lena. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" Lena nodded, color returning to her cheeks. "Yes, thank you. Security will keep an eye on things." She smiled at Abby. "Would you like me to show you where our children's section is? We just got some new releases in yesterday." As they made their way to the children's corner, Ethan noticed how Lena's shoulders gradually relaxed, though she still cast occasional glances toward the store entrance. Abby chattered happily about her favorite authors, seemingly determined to draw Lena into conversation. After selecting a few books, they made their way to the checkout counter. Lena rang up their purchases, her hands steady now as she carefully wrapped each book in tissue paper. "Thank you again," she said softly as she handed Ethan the bag. "What you did. Not many people would have stepped in like that." "Anyone would have done the same," Ethan demurred. "No," Lena said, shaking her head. "They wouldn't. Believe me, I know. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. He took Abby's hand, and they walked toward the exit. At the doorway, he glanced back. Lena stood at her counter, watching them leave. Despite the lingering fear in her eyes, her gratitude shone through like sunlight after a storm. The evening light cast long shadows through Abby's bedroom window as Ethan sat on the edge of her pink butterfly-patterned bedspread. Her room remained exactly as his late wife had decorated it, right down to the glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across the ceiling. Abby snuggled deeper under her covers, her brown eyes bright with excitement, despite the late hour. "And then you just walked right up to those mean guys, Daddy," Abby exclaimed for what must have been the 10th time since they'd left the mall. She hugged her worn stuffed rabbit closer. "You weren't scared at all." Ethan smoothed back her hair, so much like her mother's. "Actually, sweetheart, I was pretty scared." "Really?" Abby's eyes widened. "But you looked so brave." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Ethan explained, tucking the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "It means doing the right thing even when you are scared." Abby considered this for a moment, her small face serious. "Like when Mom had to be brave at the hospital?" Ethan's chest tightened, but he nodded. "Exactly like that, honey." "The lady at the bookstore looked really scared," Abby continued. "But she was nice. Did you see how she smiled at us after?" "I did." Ethan remembered the grateful look in Lena's eyes, the way her hands had trembled slightly as she thanked them. "You're just like the heroes in my books, Daddy," Abby declared with a yawn. "The ones who help people who need it." Ethan chuckled softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'm just your regular old dad, sweetie. Nothing special about that." "You're special to me," Abby mumbled, her eyes already starting to close. "Mom would think so too. Time for sleep, my brave girl." Ethan stood up quietly, making sure her nightlight was on. He paused at the doorway, watching as her breathing evened out into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Back downstairs, Ethan settled into his familiar evening routine. He loaded the dishwasher, checked that the doors were locked, and sorted through the day's shopping bags to remove tags from Abby's new clothes. When he reached into the bag from the bookstore, his fingers brushed against something unexpected, a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Curious, he pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat and delicate. "Dear Mr. Cole and Abby, I can't thank you enough for what you did today. In a world where too many people look the other way, you chose to step forward. Your courage meant more than you know. If you'd ever like to stop by the bookstore for coffee sometime, I'd love to properly thank you both. I make a mean cup of hot chocolate too, if Abby's interested. Warmly, Lena Brooks, the grateful bookstore clerk. P.S. I've included my work schedule on the back, just in case." Ethan turned the note over, seeing the carefully written hours. His thumb traced over the elegant curve of her signature, remembering the gentle way she'd spoken to Abby while ringing up their purchases, even after such a frightening encounter. He walked to the kitchen, note in hand, and stood by the counter where a framed photo of his late wife Saturday, Sarah's smile, beamed back at him, frozen in time at their last Christmas together. What would she think about this? About him having coffee with another woman? The thought made his stomach twist uncertainly. He hadn't so much as considered dating since Sarah passed away 3 years ago. His whole world had narrowed to raising Abby, to being both mother and father to their precious daughter. The idea of letting someone else into their carefully balanced life felt somehow dangerous. But there was something about Lena's note, its sincerity, the thoughtful inclusion of Abby in the invitation, that touched him. It wasn't a date, he told himself. Just coffee. A simple thank you between two adults. Still, his hand hesitated as he set the note on the counter beside Sarah's photo. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the quiet house. Upstairs, he could hear Abby's soft snoring through the baby monitor he still kept plugged in, more for his comfort than hers these days. He stood there for a long moment, looking between the note and the photograph, feeling the weight of possibility and uncertainty pressing down on his shoulders. The mall cafe buzzed with mid-morning activity as Ethan checked his watch for the third time. His coffee sat untouched, steam rising in lazy spirals. He'd arrived 15 minutes early, a habit his wife had always teased him about. "You even beat time itself," she used to say. Through the cafe's glass walls, he watched shoppers drift past with their bags and strollers. A group of teenagers laughed at a nearby table, reminding him of Abby. who was spending the morning with her best friend Sarah until lunchtime. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan looked up to find Lena Brooks standing by his table, clutching her purse strap. She wore a simple blue dress and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Without the bookstore uniform, she looked different, more relaxed, though still carrying a hint of nervousness in her smile. "Please, call me Ethan," he said, standing to pull out a chair for her. "And thank you for the note. It was very thoughtful." Lena settled into her seat, arranging her purse on her lap before setting it aside. "I should be the one thanking you again. What you did that day." She paused, her fingers tracing the handle of the coffee mug a server had just placed before her. "Not many people would have stepped in like that. Anyone would have done the same," Ethan said. But Lena shook her head. "No, they wouldn't. Trust me, I've seen enough to know." There was weight in her words, something that made Ethan wonder about other incidents she might have faced. They fell into an easy conversation about the bookstore. Lena's eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite sections to organize. "The children's corner is special," she said. "Watching kids discover stories for the first time. It's like seeing magic happen over and over." "Abby's the same way with books," Ethan smiled. "She gets that from her mother. Caroline would read to her for hours, doing all the different voices." At the mention of his wife, Lena's expression softened. "How long has it been?" 3 years this October." Ethan stirred his coffee, watching the liquid swirl. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times like a lifetime ago. Abby was 7 when it happened. Cancer." The word still felt heavy on his tongue. "I'm so sorry," Lena said quietly. "It must be challenging, raising her alone." Ethan nodded. "She's amazing, though. Stronger than I am most days. She'll say things sometimes that just—" He shook his head, smiling. "Like yesterday, she told me she knew her mom was watching over us because the clouds looked like angel wings." Lena's eyes grew misty. "Children have such pure wisdom, don't they? In the bookstore, they'll sometimes say things that leave me speechless." The conversation flowed naturally from there. Ethan learned that Lena had studied literature in college, dreaming of becoming a writer. She shared stories about the quirky customers she'd encountered, making him laugh with her spot-on impressions. "Daddy!" Abby's voice cut through the cafe chatter. She bounded over to their table, her friend Sarah's mom waving goodbye from the entrance. "Hey, sweetheart." Ethan stood to hug her. "You remember Miss Brooks from the bookstore?" Abby's face lit up. "You're the lady Daddy helped. I told Sarah all about it." She said her dad would have run away. "Abby," Ethan warned, but Lena laughed. "It's okay," she said, pulling out the chair next to her. "Would you like to join us, Abby? I was just about to tell your dad about some of my favorite fairy tales." Abby scrambled into the seat, her eyes wide. "Do you know the one about the princess and the paper birds? Mom used to read that to me." "The Sky Princess?" Lena asked. "That's one of my favorites, too. Did you know there's a sequel?" For the next hour, Ethan watched in amazement as his daughter and Lena dove deep into story after story. Lena knew every character Abby mentioned, matching her enthusiasm with genuine interest. She even pulled out a small notebook and wrote down book recommendations, promising to set them aside at the store. "Your mom had excellent taste in books," Lena told Abby. "I can tell she taught you to love stories just like she did." Abby beamed, then turned to her father. "Can we go to the bookstore right now? Please?" "Maybe another day, sweetie," Ethan said, checking the time. "We should head home soon to start dinner." As they gathered their things, Lena touched Ethan's arm lightly. "Thank you for meeting me. It was really nice talking with both of you." "We should do it again," Ethan found himself saying, surprising himself with how much he meant it. They walked together through the mall's main entrance, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Abby skipped ahead, chattering about the book she wanted to read next. That's when Ethan saw him, a familiar figure leaning against a truck in the parking lot. Derek, the ringleader from the bookstore incident, stared directly at them. His face was expressionless, but his eyes followed their every move. Ethan instinctively stepped closer to Lena and Abby, his heart rate quickening. He noticed Lena had gone very still beside him, her earlier warmth replaced by tension. "Abby," he called, keeping his voice steady. "Come walk with us to the car." His daughter returned to his side, oblivious to the shadow that had fallen over their perfect afternoon. As they reached Ethan's vehicle, he made sure Lena got safely to her own car first, parked just 2 spaces away. The weight of Derek's gaze remained heavy on his back. a silent reminder that their mall encounter might have larger consequences than he'd imagined. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elementary school parking lot as Ethan waited in the pickup line. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, watching the stream of children pour out of the building's double doors. His heart lifted when he spotted Abby's bright blue backpack bouncing through the crowd. She climbed into the back seat, her face flushed from the day's activities. "Daddy, guess what? I got an A on my science project." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Ethan beamed at her through the rearview mirror. "How about we celebrate with ice cream on the way home?" "Yes, please." Abby hugged her backpack to her chest, already launching into a detailed description of her presentation about the solar system. As Ethan pulled out of the school parking lot, something white fluttered against his windshield. His first thought was that it was just another flyer for a local business. But when he stopped at the red light, he could see it was a plain piece of paper, folded once and tucked firmly under the wiper blade. "Hold that thought about Jupiter's moons, sweetie," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to grab something real quick." Ethan put the car in park and stepped out, his movements measured and calm despite the sudden knot in his stomach. He plucked the paper from under the wiper and unfolded it. 5 words were scrawled in thick black marker. "You should have stayed out of it." His hands trembled slightly as he crumpled the note and shoved it into his pocket. The light turned green, and a car behind him honked impatiently. "What was it, Daddy?" Abby asked as he slid back behind the wheel. "Just an advertisement," he lied, forcing a smile. "Now, where were we with those moons?" They stopped for ice cream at their usual place, a small, family-owned shop with bright yellow awnings. Ethan watched Abby devour her strawberry cone, pink ice cream dripping down her fingers. Her joy was infectious, but he couldn't shake the chill that had settled in his chest. The note in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. At home, they fell into their usual evening routine. Ethan helped Abby with her math homework while dinner simmered on the stove. They ate together at the kitchen table, Abby chattering about her day between bites of spaghetti. But every few minutes, Ethan's eyes would drift to the windows, checking the darkening street outside. "Time for bed, kiddo," he announced after they'd loaded the dishwasher together. "Go brush your teeth and I'll be up in a minute." In her room, Abby knelt beside her bed in her favorite unicorn pajamas, hands clasped in prayer. Ethan knelt beside her, as they did every night. "Dear God," Abby began, her voice small but clear, "thank you for helping me do good on my science project. And thank you for my daddy and for ice cream." She paused, then added, "Please keep us safe and watch over us, just like Mommy does from heaven. Amen." Ethan's throat tightened. "Amen," he whispered, tucking her into bed and kissing her forehead. "Daddy?" Abby caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Are you scared of something?" He hesitated, searching her face in the soft glow of her nightlight. "What makes you ask that?" "You keep looking out the windows," she said, "and you're doing that thing with your eyebrows that you do when you're worried." Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her covers. "Sometimes grown-ups worry about silly things," he said carefully. "But you don't need to worry, okay? I promise to always keep you safe, remember?" She nodded, her eyes already growing heavy. "Like when you helped that lady at the bookstore?" "That's right." He kissed her forehead again. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart." After double-checking all the locks downstairs, Ethan finally retreated to his own bedroom. He pulled the crumpled note from his pocket and smoothed it out on his nightstand, studying the angry black letters under the warm lamplight. The handwriting was messy, aggressive. Each letter pressed so hard into the paper it had left indentations on the back. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, then back at the note. The same scene kept playing in his mind. Those 4 young men at the mall, their faces twisted with anger, as security led them away. He'd done the right thing, he knew that. But now, the threat felt real, personal. It wasn't just about him anymore. He had Abby to think about. Sleep refused to come. The house creaked and settled around him, each sound making him tense. The note lay on his nightstand like a silent accusation, the words seeming to grow darker and more menacing in the lamp's glow. Ethan reached out and touched it with one finger, as if to convince himself it was real and not just a bad dream. He thought about calling the police, but what would he tell them? One threatening note wasn't much to go on. Besides, involving the authorities might only make things worse. The memory of those men's faces, their barely contained violence, told him they weren't the type to be deterred by official warnings. The bedside clock ticked steadily toward midnight. Down the hall, he could hear Abby's soft breathing through the open doors. The sound both comforted and terrified him. His precious daughter, so innocent and trusting, believing her daddy could keep all the bad things away. He had to find a way to protect her. But how do you fight shadows? How do you defend against threats that haven't fully materialized? The note seemed to mock him from the nightstand, its message clear and crude in the lamplight. Ethan lay there, wide awake, his mind churning with possibilities and fears, uncertain of what tomorrow might bring. The afternoon sun warmed the busy sidewalk as Ethan and Abby made their way to the mall's bookstore. Ethan's shoulders felt tight with worry about the threatening note, but he forced a smile for his daughter's sake. Abby skipped ahead, her ponytail bouncing with each step. "Do you think Miss Lena will read us another story today, Daddy?" Abby asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "We'll see, sweetie. She might be busy with customers." The bookstore's familiar bell chimed as they pushed through the glass door. The scent of new books and coffee from the adjoining cafe wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Shelves stretched toward the ceiling, creating cozy corridors filled with countless stories. Lena stood behind the counter, arranging a display of children's books. When she looked up, her face brightened, though Ethan noticed the shadows under her eyes. She hadn't been sleeping well either. "My favorite customers," Lena called out, smoothing her navy blue cardigan. "I was hoping you'd stop by today." Abby ran to the counter, practically bouncing on her toes. "Miss Lena, can you show me where the fairy tales are again?" "Of course, sweetheart." Lena glanced at Ethan, her smile faltering slightly. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "Just wanted to check on you after everything." Lena's hands fidgeted with her name tag. "I'm managing. The store owner installed new security cameras yesterday." She lowered her voice. "Have you had any trouble?" Before Ethan could mention the note, Abby tugged on Lena's sleeve. "Can we sit in the reading corner, please?" "Let me just tell Mrs. Martinez I'm taking a short break." Lena disappeared into the back room, returning moments later with a gentle smile. They settled into the children's corner, where bright cushions created a cozy reading nook. Abby immediately picked out her favorite book, climbing onto the oversized armchair between Ethan and Lena. As Lena began reading, her voice soft and animated, Ethan watched his daughter's face light up with wonder. The worry that had been gnawing at him since finding the note eased slightly. Here, surrounded by books and warmth, the outside world felt distant. Halfway through the story, Abby suddenly sat up straight, her expression serious. She turned to Lena, her small hand reaching out to touch Lena's arm. "Miss Lena?" Abby's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, sweetie. Mommy says you're my daddy." The words hung in the air like suspended snowflakes. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Lena's hands trembled slightly, the book nearly slipping from her grasp. What did you say, honey?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. Abby's brow furrowed in concentration. "Before Mommy went to heaven, she told me a story. She said Daddy would find someone special who would help finish our family's story." She looked at Lena with complete certainty. Just like in the fairy tales. Lena's face had gone pale. "Abby, I knew your mommy. A long time ago, in college. We were in the same ministry group." "You knew Sarah?" Ethan's world tilted slightly. How had he not made the connection before? Lena nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "She was so kind to me when I first joined, always including me, making sure I felt welcome. I lost touch with her after graduation, but she swallowed hard. I never forgot her." Abby beamed, completely unaware of the adult's shock. "See? Mommy knew. She said God would send us an angel." Ethan's mind raced through memories of Sarah's final days in the hospital. She had been peaceful, accepting, speaking often about God's plan for their future. Had she somehow known? Had she seen something in her final moments that he couldn't? "Sarah always did have a way of seeing things clearly," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Lena wiped her eyes quickly, trying to smile for Abby's sake. "Your mommy was very special, Abby. She had such a beautiful heart." "Just like you," Abby declared, snuggling closer to Lena. "Can you finish the story now?" The rest of the reading passed in a blur. Ethan barely heard the words, too caught up in the storm of emotions coursing through him. He watched Lena's gentle interactions with Abby, saw the tenderness in her eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah. When it was time to leave, Abby hugged Lena tightly. "Thank you for the story, Miss Lena. Will you read to me again soon?" "Of course, sweetheart." Lena's voice wavered slightly. "Any time." At the store entrance, Ethan paused. "Lena, She shook her head, understanding in her eyes. "It's a lot to process. I know." The drive home was silent, except for Abby humming softly in the back seat. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as Sarah's words echoed through his daughter's innocent revelation. The threat of the morning's note seemed distant now, overshadowed by the weight of possibility and memory. At a red light, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Abby had fallen asleep, her face peaceful, clutching the book Lena had let her borrow. His daughter's words played over and over in his mind. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The light turned green, but for a moment, Ethan remained still, haunted by the echo of his wife's final wisdom and the unexpected path it was revealing. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers as Ethan, Abby, and Lena sat at the ice cream parlor's outdoor table. Abby's chocolate sundae was decorated with colorful sprinkles that matched her bright smile. The afternoon sun cast warm shadows across their faces as they enjoyed each other's company. "Can I have another scoop?" Abby asked, her spoon scraping the bottom of her bowl. Ethan shook his head with a gentle smile. "One's enough, sweetheart. We don't want to spoil dinner." "But Lena hasn't finished hers yet." Abby pointed to Lena's half-eaten vanilla cone. Lena laughed, the sound like wind chimes in the breeze. "That's because I'm savoring it. Good things take time, right?" These moments had become precious over the past week. What started as occasional meetings had grown into daily gatherings. Lena would stop by after her shifts at the bookstore, helping Abby with her reading assignments while Ethan prepared dinner. Sometimes they'd share quiet meals together, talking about their days and dreams. On Wednesday afternoon, Lena sat at their kitchen table, helping Abby with her math homework. 7 times 8? She prompted gently. Abby's forehead wrinkled in concentration. 56! That's right. Lena high-fived her. "You're getting so good at this." Ethan watched them from the kitchen counter where he was chopping vegetables for dinner. The scene felt so natural, so right. It reminded him of evenings long ago when Sarah would help Abby with her assignment. Later that evening, after Abby had gone upstairs to get ready for bed, Lena lingered in the living room. Her fingers traced the spine of a photo album on the bookshelf. "I need to tell you something, Ethan," she said softly. He set down the dish towel he'd been holding and turned to face her. "What is it?" Lena pulled out the album and opened it carefully. "I recognized Sarah's face the first time I saw her picture here." She pointed to a group photo from a college retreat. "We were in the same campus ministry group at State. I was a freshman when she was a senior." Ethan leaned closer, studying the familiar faces in the faded photograph. There was Sarah, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, and next to her, a younger Lena, her dark hair in braids. "She was so kind to me," Lena continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I was struggling that first semester, feeling lost and alone. Sarah took me under her wing, invited me to Bible study, made sure I never ate lunch alone." Ethan sat down heavily on the couch. "She never mentioned. We lost touch after she graduated. I transferred schools the next year." Lena closed the album gently. "When I saw you and Abby in the mall that first day, something felt familiar. Then I saw Sarah's picture here, and it all made sense. The revelation settled over them like a warm blanket. It wasn't just coincidence that brought them together. It was something deeper, more meaningful. Their time together continued to grow more comfortable, more natural. Friday evening found them sharing pizza and watching movies in Ethan's living room. Abby sat between them on the couch, munching on popcorn and providing running commentary on the animated film they'd chosen. "Look, Daddy, the princess looks just like Lena," Abby exclaimed, pointing at the screen. Lena blushed, and Ethan couldn't help but notice she did share the character's kind eyes and gentle smile. As the movie progressed, Abby's commentary grew quieter. Her head began to nod, and she slowly leaned against Lena's shoulder. Within minutes, she was fast asleep, her breathing deep and peaceful. Lena remained perfectly still, not wanting to disturb the sleeping child. She looked at Ethan with wonder in her eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe this moment was real. The soft glow from the TV illuminated their faces as the movie played on, largely forgotten. Abby's small hand was curled around Lena's arm, her face peaceful in sleep. The scene was a picture of trust, of comfort, of a family finding its way back to wholeness. Ethan watched them both, his heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. The sight of his daughter so naturally comfortable with Lena, the way Lena's presence filled the empty spaces in their home, it all felt right in a way he hadn't experienced since Sarah's passing. The movie's credits began to roll, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Abby remained nestled against Lena's shoulder, lost in peaceful dreams. The moment hung suspended in time, perfect in its simplicity. 3 hearts beating in quiet harmony, a family reborn in the gentle glow of a Friday night. The Sunday morning sun painted golden streaks through the stained glass windows of First Community Church. Ethan shifted in the worn wooden pew, uncomfortable with all the attention coming his way. Ever since the Pine Grove Gazette ran the story about the mall incident, he couldn't go anywhere without someone calling him a hero. "Did you see the article, Ethan?" Mrs. Henderson whispered from the row behind them. "My Harold cut it out to show everyone at his bridge club." Abby sat up straighter beside him, her blue dress matching her bright eyes. "I have it in my scrapbook," she announced proudly, "right next to my school pictures." The article wasn't even that big, just a small piece on page 3 with the headline, "Local Father Stands Up to Mall Harassers." But in their small town, any news traveled fast. The photo they'd used showed Ethan leaving the mall with Abby, caught by someone's cell phone camera right after the incident. Pastor Jim stood at the pulpit, his silver hair catching the morning light. His warm voice filled the sanctuary as he began his sermon. "Today, I want to talk about courage," he said, looking directly at Ethan. "Not the kind you see in movies with explosions and car chases, but the everyday kind, the kind that makes an ordinary person stand up and say, 'This isn't right.'" Ethan felt his face grow warm. He stared down at his hands, calloused from years of holding pencils and typing on keyboards at his accounting job. They didn't look like a hero's hands to him. "We have such an example in our own congregation," Pastor Jim continued. "Our brother Ethan Cole showed us what it means to be Christ, like in action, not just in words. When he saw someone in need, he didn't walk away. He didn't wait for someone else to help. He stepped forward." Abby grabbed Ethan's arm and squeezed it tight. Her face glowed with pride, just like her mother's used to when Ethan did something she admired. The similarity made his heart ache. "Daddy," she whispered loudly enough for nearby congregants to hear. "That's you he's talking about." A few people chuckled softly at her enthusiasm. Mrs. Peterson, who taught Sunday school, reached forward to pat Abby's shoulder. "But true courage," Pastor Jim went on, "isn't about seeking glory. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's scary." Ethan didn't step in at the mall to be a hero. He did it because someone needed help. The congregation nodded in agreement. Ethan noticed several people turning to look at him, their faces full of admiration. He wished they wouldn't. What he'd done didn't feel extraordinary. It felt like what anyone should do. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and donuts. Ethan found himself surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations. "Such a fine example for our young people," Mr. Roberts said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We need more men like you in this town," added his wife. Abby bounced around him like a happy puppy, soaking up every compliment directed at her father. "He's teaching me to be brave, too," she told anyone who would listen. Pastor Jim made his way through the crowd to where Ethan stood. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "How are you holding up with all this attention?" Ethan shrugged, trying to find the right words. "It feels excessive. I just did what needed doing." "And that's exactly why people are responding this way," Pastor Jim said quietly. "In a world where it's easier to look away, you chose to look toward the problem. That matters, Ethan." "I keep thinking about what Sarah would have done," Ethan admitted, his voice low so only Pastor Jim could hear. "She never could stand by when someone was being hurt." The pastor's face softened at the mention of Ethan's late wife.
"She'd be proud of you and of how you're raising Abby."
Speaking of Abby, she appeared at Ethan's side with a donut in each hand. "Look, Daddy, Mrs. Wilson gave me an extra one for being a hero's daughter." "Now, sweetheart," Ethan started to protest, but Pastor Jim's laugh interrupted him. "Let her enjoy this," the pastor said with a wink.
"It's not every day your father makes the newspaper."
As the crowd in the fellowship hall began to thin, Ethan checked his watch. "Time to head home, Abby. You've got that book report to finish."
"Can we have grilled cheese for lunch?"
she asked, carefully wrapping her second donut in a napkin. "Sure thing, kiddo." They said their goodbyes and walked through the church's heavy wooden doors into the bright afternoon sunshine. The spring air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of newly cut grass from the church lawn. Ethan helped Abby down the stone steps, holding her hand as she jumped the last two, their usual Sunday routine. But as they reached the sidewalk, something made him pause. Across the street, leaning against a beat-up blue sedan, stood one of the young men from the mall, Derek. Ethan remembered his name from the security report. The young man's posture was casual, but his eyes were hard as he stared at them. A smirk played across his face, turning what should have been a smile into something ugly. The fluorescent lights of the Pine Grove police station buzzed overhead as Ethan sat in a hard plastic chair, the threatening note carefully preserved in a clear evidence bag on Sergeant Miller's desk. The officer, a heavy-set man with graying temples, studied the paper with practiced eyes. "The handwriting's messy," Sergeant Miller said, adjusting his reading glasses. "No fingerprints likely to be found either, given how many people probably touched this paper before you discovered it." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But it's clearly from those men at the mall. The timing can't be coincidental." "Mr. Cole, I understand your concern." The sergeant's voice was sympathetic but measured. "Without concrete evidence linking these individuals to the threat, our hands are tied. The mall incident is on record, but that alone doesn't prove they wrote this note. So we just wait until they do something worse?" Ethan's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from a nearby desk sergeant. "Document everything," Miller advised, sliding a small notepad across the desk. "Times, dates, descriptions. Take photos if you can do so, safely. And most importantly, stay vigilant. If you see any of those men, call us immediately." Ethan picked up the notepad, its pages blank and waiting. Just like his options, he thought bitterly. Later that afternoon, Ethan met Lena at the coffee shop where they'd first talked. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her untouched cup of tea. The usual warmth in her brown eyes had been replaced by shadows of worry. "I should never have let you get involved," she whispered, staring down at the table. "Now you and Abby are in danger because of me." "Hey!" Ethan reached across the table, covering her shaking hands with his steady one. "This isn't your fault. Those guys are the problem, not you. But if you hadn't stepped in that day, then I wouldn't have been able to live with myself," Ethan finished firmly. "And what kind of example would that have set for Abby?" At the mention of his daughter, Lena's eyes welled with tears. "She's such a precious girl, Ethan. The thought of anything happening to her." "Nothing will happen to her," Ethan assured her, though his own stomach churned with worry. "I've already talked to her school. They know not to let anyone but me pick her up, and her teacher's keeping a close eye on her during recess." Lena nodded, but her shoulders remained tense. Maybe we should take a break from seeing each other, just until things calm down." "No," the word came out sharper than Ethan intended, and he softened his tone. "Running away and hiding isn't the answer. That's exactly what they want." A couple at the next table got up to leave, their chairs scraping against the floor. Lena jumped at the sound, and Ethan saw how frayed her nerves had become. "Look," he said gently, "I've got motion sensor lights installed around the house now. Changed the locks too, just to be safe. We're taking precautions, but we can't let fear rule our lives." Lena managed a weak smile, but her eyes kept darting to the cafe windows, scanning for threats. Throughout the rest of the day, Ethan felt restless. He checked his phone constantly for messages from Abby's school, even though he knew she was safe in her after-school program. Every time a car drove past his accounting office, he found himself looking up from his spreadsheets, searching for familiar faces through the window. Evening brought no relief. After tucking Abby into bed with extra hugs and an extra bedtime story, Ethan paced the living room. The house felt too quiet, too exposed. He double-checked the locks on all the windows and doors, drew the curtains tight. Just past midnight, a sound cut through the silence, the crunch of gravel under heavy footsteps. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs as he moved to the front window. The motion sensor lights hadn't triggered yet, which meant whoever was out there was staying in the shadows. He reached for his phone, already programmed with the police department's number. Another crunch. Closer now. Taking a deep breath, Ethan flicked on the porch light and yanked open the front door. The sudden brightness illuminated his front yard, empty except for dancing shadows from the oak trees. But there, in his driveway, fresh tire tracks cut through the dirt, wide marks from a vehicle that had pulled in and backed out in a hurry. He stood in the doorway, phone clutched in his hand, staring at those tracks. They seemed to mock him, a reminder that threat could come and go like a ghost, leaving nothing but traces and fear in its wake. Inside, a small voice called out, "Daddy?" Abby stood at the top of the stairs in her butterfly pajamas, clutching her stuffed giraffe. "I heard a noise." "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Ethan said, closing and locking the door. "Just some car turning around in our driveway. Let's get you back to bed." As he tucked her in for the second time that night, Abby looked up at him with her mother's eyes. "Are the bad men coming back?" Ethan's throat tightened. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, buying time to steady his voice. "Don't you worry about that. Daddy's got everything under control." But as he sat in the darkness of his own room afterward, watching headlights sweep across his ceiling, Ethan wondered if that was a promise he could keep. The tire tracks in his driveway said otherwise. The rest of the night stretched ahead, long and sleepless, filled with every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind through the trees, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would file another police report, add another entry to his growing log of incidents. But tonight, all he could do was wait and watch. A father standing guard over his child's dreams, counting the hours until dawn. The Saturday morning sun painted golden streaks across the fairgrounds entrance, where colorful balloons danced in the autumn breeze. Abby bounced on her toes, her pink sneakers barely touching the ground as she pointed at the towering Ferris wheel that crowned the community fair. "Can we go on that first, Daddy? Please?" Her eyes sparkled with excitement, momentarily forgetting the worries that had haunted their household. Ethan squeezed her hand, grateful for the pure joy in her voice. "What do you think, Lena? Ready to touch the clouds?" Lena adjusted her denim jacket, her smile warm but nervous. "As long as you both hold my hands. Heights aren't exactly my favorite thing." "Don't worry," Abby declared, grabbing Lena's hand. "Daddy says being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing it anyway." They made their way through the fair, weaving between laughing families and the tempting aromas of funnel cakes and popcorn. The fair had transformed the usually empty field into a wonderland of lights, music, and joy. Children clutched rainbow balloons, and the air hummed with carnival tunes. At the Ferris wheel, Abby practically dragged them to the line. The operator, a friendly older man with a white mustache, helped them into their seat. As they rose higher, Lena's grip tightened on the safety bar. "Look," Abby pointed as they reached the top. "You can see our whole town from here." Ethan watched his daughter's face light up, then glanced at Lena. Her nervousness had melted into wonder as she gazed at the view. The morning sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and something stirred in Ethan's heart, something he hadn't felt in years. After the Ferris wheel, they wandered through the fair's maze of attractions. Abby insisted on trying every game, determined to win a stuffed animal. At the ring toss, she threw with fierce concentration but kept missing. "Here, sweetie." Lena stepped forward, placing gentle hands on Abby's shoulders. "Try holding it like this." She adjusted Abby's stance, and together they threw the ring. It landed perfectly around a bottleneck. "We did it!" Abby jumped up and down, hugging Lena tightly. The vendor handed her a fluffy purple unicorn, which she promptly named Hope. They stopped at a cotton candy stand, where Ethan bought 3 massive clouds of pink sugar. Sitting on a nearby bench, they watched a local band play country music while their fingers grew sticky with sweetness. Abby's face was soon covered in pink sugar, making them all laugh. "You've got some right here," Lena said, touching her own nose to show Abby where the cotton candy had stuck. "So do you," Abby giggled, reaching up to dab a bit of cotton candy on Lena's nose. Instead of getting upset, Lena crossed her eyes trying to see it, making Abby laugh even harder. Ethan watched them, his heart swelling. It had been so long since he'd heard Abby laugh like this, free and unguarded, like a child should. They tried more rides, the carousel where Abby chose a golden horse and pretended to be a princess, the bumper cars where Lena surprised them both with her competitive spirit, and the fun house with its silly mirrors that made them all look stretched and squished. At the face painting station, Abby got a butterfly that sparkled in the sunlight. The artist added tiny gems that caught the light every time she smiled. Lena opted for a small star on her cheek, and even Ethan allowed Abby to convince him to get a tiny heart painted on his hand. "Now we match," Abby declared, holding up her own hand where she'd asked for the same design. As the afternoon warmed, they found shade under a large oak tree. Abby sat between them, clutching her unicorn and watching a group of dancers perform on the main stage. The breeze carried the scent of barbecue and the sound of children's laughter. Ethan looked at Lena over Abby's head, seeing how naturally she fit into their little family. She caught his gaze and smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. His heart skipped a beat, remembering what it felt like to fall in love. The drive home was peaceful, with Abby dozing in the back seat, her unicorn tucked safely under her arm. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, much like the cotton candy they'd shared earlier. After carrying a sleeping Abby to her bed, Ethan walked Lena to the front porch. The porch light cast a soft glow around them, and crickets chirped their evening song in the distance. "Thank you for today," Lena said softly, her star face paint still glittering. "Seeing Abby so happy, it meant everything." Ethan took her hand gently in his, noticing how perfectly it fit there. With tender reverence, he raised it to his lips and placed a soft kiss on her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, but it felt right, respectful of the precious gift that was growing between them. Lena's blush deepened, and her voice was barely above a whisper as she said, "I don't want to lose this." The late autumn sun had already set behind the office buildings, leaving only a faint purple glow in the western sky. Ethan rubbed his tired eyes, the glow of his computer screen having grown harsh in the dimness of his office. Columns of numbers blurred together as he finished the last quarterly report. "Just a few more minutes," he muttered to himself, thinking of Abby waiting at home with Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who often watched her. He'd promised to pick up pizza on his way back. The office floor was silent except for the soft hum of the heating system and the clicking of his keyboard. Most of his coworkers had left hours ago, their cubicles dark and empty. Through his office window, he could see the parking lot lights flickering on one by one, creating pools of yellow light in the growing darkness. Finally satisfied with the report, Ethan saved the file and shut down his computer. He gathered his coat and briefcase, checking his phone. 3 missed texts from Lena asking about their plans for the weekend. A smile crossed his face as he typed a quick reply. The elevator doors opened to the underground parking garage with a soft ding. His footsteps echoed against the concrete as he walked toward his car, one of only 4 vehicles left in the vast space. The fluorescent lights cast strange shadows, and the air held that peculiar stillness unique to empty parking garages. A sound, scuffing shoes against concrete, made him pause. Before he could turn, something hard struck him between the shoulder blades, sending him stumbling forward. His briefcase clattered across the floor, papers spilling out like scattered leaves. "Remember me," a familiar voice sneered. Derek, the leader from the mall incident, stepped into view, flanked by his 3 companions. Their faces held cruel smiles as they surrounded Ethan. "Look who's not so brave without an audience," another one taunted, cracking his knuckles. Ethan raised his hands, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't want to do this. The police already know about your threats." Derek laughed, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. "Threats? This isn't a threat, hero. This is payback." The first punch caught Ethan in the stomach, driving the air from his lungs. He doubled over, gasping, as another fist connected with his jaw. The taste of copper filled his mouth as he stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting a concrete pillar. "Should have minded your own business," one of them growled, landing another blow to his ribs. Ethan tried to defend himself, managing to block a few punches, but they were younger, stronger, and there were 4 of them. A kick to the back of his knees sent him to the ground. His phone clattered from his pocket, and one of them immediately stomped on it, the screen shattering with a sharp crack. "No calling for help now," Derek sneered, delivering another kick to Ethan's side. The pain came in waves as they continued their assault. Through swollen eyes, Ethan caught glimpses of their faces. Young, angry, almost enjoying his suffering. He thought of Abby, of Lena, of his promise to protect them. But here he was, helpless, on the cold concrete floor. "Not so tough now, are you?" One of them grabbed his hair, forcing him to look up. "Next time, stay out of other people's business." They took turns, methodically working him over. Ethan tasted blood, felt the sharp sting of split skin on his cheek, the throbbing ache of bruised ribs. The garage lights above seemed to spin and blur. "That's enough," Derek finally said, standing over Ethan's crumpled form. "He's learned his lesson." Ethan lay there, each breath sending spikes of pain through his chest. His whole body felt like one massive bruise. He could barely keep his eyes open, the garage lights swimming in his vision. The sound of their laughing and footsteps grew distant as they walked away, leaving him alone on the cold concrete. Time seemed to lose meaning. He tried to move, but his body refused to cooperate. The garage was silent except for his ragged breathing and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Blood trickled warm down his face, and he could feel the swelling beginning around his eyes. Through his fading consciousness, he heard the distant sound of a car engine. Headlights swept across the garage walls, growing brighter as the vehicle approached. The beams caught him in their glow, illuminating his battered form on the garage floor. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the sterile room. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights above. His whole body ached, and his face felt swollen and tight. Through blurred vision, he made out Abby's small form beside the bed, her warm hand clutching his. "Daddy?" Her voice trembled. "Are you awake?" Ethan tried to squeeze her hand but winced at the pain shooting through his arm. "Hey, sweetheart," he managed, his voice rough and barely above a whisper. Across the room, Lena paced back and forth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her face was pale and drawn, dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes. When she noticed Ethan was conscious, she stopped, but couldn't seem to look directly at him. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is all my fault. If you hadn't tried to help me that day at the store." She pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Don't," Ethan said, trying to sit up but falling back against the pillows. His ribs screamed in protest. "You didn't do this, Lena." The doctor had already been in earlier. Ethan had a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, a sprained wrist, and enough bruises to paint a canvas. The police had taken his statement, but in the darkness of the parking lot, he hadn't seen his attackers clearly enough to make a positive identification. Abby climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, mindful of the IV lines and monitoring wires. "Mrs. Martinez from church brought you flowers, Daddy." She pointed to a cheerful bouquet on the windowsill. "And Pastor Mike came to pray with us while you were sleeping." Ethan managed a weak smile, but inside, doubt gnawed at him. He'd always taught Abby to stand up for what was right, to help others in need. But now, lying in a hospital bed, beaten and broken, he wondered if he'd been naive. The world wasn't always kind to heroes. "Maybe," he started, his voice heavy with defeat. "Maybe I should have just called security that day, left it to someone else to handle." Lena moved closer, tears streaming down her face. "Don't say that. Please. You saved me that day. Those men, they would have." She couldn't finish the sentence. "But at what cost?" Ethan's eyes drifted to Abby. "I have to think about my daughter. What if they'd come after her instead of me? What kind of father puts his child at risk?" Abby's small face grew serious, her mother's determination shining in her eyes. "Daddy," she said firmly, "you always tell me heroes don't quit." She squeezed his hand again. "Remember when I wanted to give up on learning to ride my bike? You said being brave means getting back up, even when you're scared." The simple wisdom of his daughter's words hit him hard. Ethan felt tears burning in his eyes. "Those bad men want us to be scared," Abby continued. "But Mommy always said God doesn't give us a spirit of fear." She looked up at Lena. "Right?" Lena wiped her eyes and moved to the other side of the bed. "She's right, Ethan. And you're teaching her the most important lesson of all, that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard." A nurse came in to check Ethan's vitals, adjusting his pain medication. The room fell quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Abby had curled up in the chair next to the bed, her favorite book from the children's wing open on her lap. Lena sat on Ethan's other side, her presence both comforting and concerning. He worried about her safety now more than ever. The pain medication began to take effect, making his thoughts fuzzy around the edges. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on him. His daughter's words echoed in his mind. Heroes don't quit. But the memory of fists falling, of boots connecting with his ribs, of cruel laughter in the darkness. It all swirled together with his fears for Abby's safety and his growing feelings for Lena. Would a real hero put the people he loved at risk? Or was the greater risk in teaching his daughter that evil should go unchallenged, that fear should guide their choices? Ethan drifted between consciousness and sleep, torn between the instinct to protect his family by backing down and the deep-seated conviction that standing up to bullies was the only way to truly keep them safe. The medication pulled him under, But even as he slipped away, the battle between fear and determination raged on in his heart. The last thing he felt was Abby's small hand in his, an anchor in the storm of his doubts, reminding him that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come wrapped in the smallest packages. The hospital corridor stretched empty and quiet as Lena paced outside Ethan's room. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, matching the frantic rhythm of her heart. She stopped at the window, watching Ethan through the glass as he slept. The bruises on his face had darkened to angry purple, and his right eye remained swollen shut. This was all her fault. If she hadn't accepted his help that day at the mall, if she hadn't let herself grow close to him and Abby, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass, tears welling up. The image of Ethan lying beaten in that parking lot haunted her. What if next time they went after Abby? The thought made her stomach turn. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Lena spun around to find Ethan awake, watching her with his good eye. She hadn't heard him stir. "I have to," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Look what they did to you, Ethan. This is because of me." "Don't." His voice was hoarse but firm. "Please don't do this." She shook her head, backing away from the bed. "I'm poison. Everything I touch." Her voice broke. "I can't let them hurt you or Abby again. I won't." "Lena." Ethan tried to sit up, wincing at the movement. "Running away won't solve anything. They'll just find someone else to terrorize." "But at least you'll be safe." The words burst from her like a dam breaking. "I've been selfish, letting myself believe I could have a family again. But I was fooling myself. That's not true." Ethan's face creased with pain, both physical and emotional. "You've brought so much light back into our lives. Abby adores you. And he swallowed hard. "I need you, Lena." She turned away, unable to bear the raw honesty in his voice. "You need to be alive for your daughter. These men, they're dangerous. They won't stop. So we face them together." Ethan's voice grew stronger. "We go to the police again, file charges. We fight back the right way." "I can't ask you to do that." Lena's shoulders shook. "I can't ask you to risk everything." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." The determination in his tone made her turn back to him. "Remember what you told me about faith? About how sometimes God puts people in our path for a reason?" Lena nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Well, I believe he brought you to us." Ethan reached out his hand, despite the 4-line attached to it. "Please don't throw that away because you're scared. I'm scared too. But running isn't the answer." "But what if—" A small voice from the doorway cut through their argument. "Mommy said love always makes us stronger." They both turned to see Abby standing there in her pink pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide and serious. "Sweetheart," Lena started, but Abby wasn't finished. "Before Mommy went to heaven, she told me that love is like a shield." Abby walked into the room, her little face set with determination. "She said when we love each other, we're stronger than any bad guys." Ethan's good eye glistened with tears. "Come here, baby." He patted the edge of the bed, and Abby climbed up carefully, mindful of his injuries. "Please don't go, Miss Lena." Abby's bottom lip trembled. "We need you. Daddy smiles more when you're here. And you make the best hot chocolate. And you know all the good stories." She looked up at Lena with eyes that seemed too wise for her 10 years. "The bad men want us to be scared and alone, but we're not alone anymore." Lena's resolve crumbled. She crossed to the bed, her legs shaking, and sat down beside them. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing gently despite his bruised knuckles. "Your mommy was very wise," Lena managed through her tears. "And very right." "So you'll stay?" Abby asked hopefully. Lena looked at Ethan, saw the same hope reflected in his face. The fear was still there, a dark shadow in her heart, but something stronger pushed back against it. Love, yes, but also courage. The kind of courage that had made Ethan step forward that day in the mall. The kind that made Abby face each day without her mother with such grace. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I'll stay." She squeezed Ethan's hand back. "We'll face this together." Ethan tugged her closer, and she leaned forward until their foreheads touched. His tears mingled with hers as they held each other, Abby's small arms wrapping around them both. "Together," Ethan murmured against her hair. "No matter what comes." They stayed like that for a long moment, their embrace a promise and a prayer. Outside the window, the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, chasing away the darkness of night. The old wooden doors of First Community Church creaked open as people filed in for the emergency meeting. Evening light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across worn pews and familiar faces. Ethan sat in the front row, his injuries still visible but healing. Abby held his hand tight, her small fingers intertwined with his. Pastor Mike stood at the pulpit, his weathered face grave yet determined. "We're here tonight because one of our own needs us." Ethan Cole showed tremendous courage, and now he's paying a price no good man should have to pay. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked around the sanctuary. Neighbors, friends, and even people he barely knew had come. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store, the Wilsons from down the street, his coworkers from the accounting firm. They filled nearly every pew, their presence a quiet testament to community. With a deep breath that made his ribs ache, Ethan stood. He walked slowly to the pulpit, each step careful and measured. The bruises on his face felt more prominent under the church's bright lights. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm not here to ask for pity. I'm here because we need to talk about fear and why we can't let it win." The congregation sat in rapt attention as Ethan shared his story. He told them about the mall, about watching those men corner Lena, about Abby's innocent plea to help. His voice grew stronger as he spoke about choice, the choice to act instead of turning away. "These men," he continued, "they want us to be afraid. They want us to look the other way next time. But that's not who we are as a community. That's not what I want to teach my daughter." Abby beamed up at him from her seat, pride shining in her eyes. Lena sat a few rows back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Ethan gestured for her to join him, she hesitated. Her legs felt like lead as she stood, but somehow she made it to the front. Her voice quavered, and she gripped the pulpit edge. "I've spent so many nights blaming myself for what happened to Ethan, for bringing this trouble into his and Abby's lives." She paused, gathering strength. "But then I remember something Ethan's wife once told me, years ago in college ministry. She said that love isn't about being safe. It's about being brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when you're scared." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she pressed on. "These men, they've taken so much from us already. Our peace of mind, our sense of security, but they can't take our ability to forgive, to hope, to stand together." A murmur of agreement rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Henderson stood up, her silver hair catching the light.
We're with you, dear. All of us.
Others began standing too, voices rising in support. Mr. Wilson, a retired police officer, spoke up from the back. "We'll set up neighborhood watches. Make sure you're not alone." Pastor Mike stepped forward, placing a hand on both Ethan and Lena's shoulders. "Let us pray together," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. "For protection, for justice, and for courage." The congregation bowed their heads. Some reached out to hold hands across pews. Others wiped tears from their eyes. The prayer that followed wasn't just words, it was a pledge, a community binding itself together in support of one of its own. After the final "Amen," people didn't rush to leave. They gathered around Ethan, Lena, and Abby. Church ladies promised casseroles. Men offered to drive by the house at night. Teenagers volunteered to walk Abby to and from school. As the meeting wound down, Officer Roberts, who had been sitting quietly in the back, approached Ethan. His police badge caught the light as he pulled him aside. "We've got some developments," he said in a low voice. "Security cameras from your workplace parking lot gave us clear shots of their faces. We've identified 2 of them already." Hope flickered in Ethan's chest. "That's good news." "It is," Officer Roberts nodded. "But we need you, Ethan. We need you to formally identify them, to testify. I won't sugarcoat it. It won't be easy. They'll know who you are." Ethan looked across the church, where Lena was hugging Abby, both of them surrounded by caring faces. The sight gave him strength. "Whatever you need," he told Officer Roberts. "I'll do it." The officer squeezed his shoulder. "We're close to closing in on them. Real close. Just stay strong a little longer." As the officer walked away, Ethan felt the weight of what lay ahead. But looking around at his community, at Lena's gentle smile, at Abby's unwavering faith in him. He knew he wasn't facing it alone. The church's stained glass windows now cast their colors on empty pews, but the strength of tonight's gathering lingered in the air like a promise. The courtroom's heavy oak doors opened with a solemn creak. Ethan Cole straightened his tie, trying to ignore the pain that still shot through his ribs when he moved. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the wood-paneled walls as he made his way to the front of the room. Detective Sarah Martinez stood near the prosecutor's table, her notepad ready. She gave Ethan an encouraging nod as he passed. The courtroom benches were filled with familiar faces from church and the neighborhood, a quiet army of support that had rallied around him. In the gallery's front row, Lena sat with Abby nestled close to her side. His daughter wore her favorite blue dress, the one her mother had bought her before she passed. Abby's small hand gripped Lena's tightly as she watched her father. "Please state your name for the record," the court clerk said, adjusting his glasses. "Ethan James Cole." His voice came out steadier than he expected. From the corner of his eye, he could see them, Derek and his 3 friends, sitting with their court-appointed lawyers. Their faces were set in hard lines, Derek's eyes boring into him with undisguised hatred. Ethan forced himself to look straight ahead. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor began, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Please tell the court about what happened at Riverside Mall on August 12th. Ethan took a deep breath. "I was shopping with my daughter when we heard shouting from the bookstore. There was a group of young men," he gestured toward Derek and his friends, "harassing one of the employees, Lena Brooks. And what did you observe specifically?" "They had her cornered by the self-help section. She was trying to get away, but they kept blocking her path. They were making crude comments, laughing at her fear." Derek shifted in his seat, whispering something to one of his companions. The judge shot them a warning look. "What happened next, Mr. Cole?" Ethan's voice wavered slightly. "My daughter asked if we could help. I couldn't just walk away. I stepped between them and Miss Brooks asked them to leave her alone." "Did they threaten you at that time?" "Yes. The one in the blue shirt, Derek said he'd make me regret getting involved." As Ethan continued his testimony, he described finding the threatening note on his car, the stalking, the increasing fear. His hands trembled slightly as he recounted the night of the beating, but he kept going. Abby's face showed nothing but pride, her chin lifted high. Lena's eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled at him, mouthing, "You're doing great." "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor continued, "please tell us about the attack in the parking lot." The fluorescent light suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. Ethan loosened his collar slightly. "I was working late at the accounting firm. Around 8:30, I headed to my car. They were waiting for me." "The defendants?" "Yes. All 4 of them," Derek said. Ethan paused, steeling himself. He said, "Time to learn your lesson, hero." The courtroom was silent, except for the soft scratch of the court reporter's typing. Ethan described the beating in careful detail, the kicks to his ribs, the punch that broke his nose, how they smashed his phone when he tried to call for help. "And if Mrs. Jenkins hadn't been working late and found you?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted quietly. "I was barely conscious when she pulled up." One of Derek's friends, the youngest one with the red hair, looked down at his hands, shame finally crossing his face. But Derek's expression remained hard, defiant. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said. "No further questions." The defense attorneys took their turns, trying to suggest that Ethan had provoked the confrontation, that he had somehow threatened their clients first, but his testimony held firm. Through it all, he kept looking at Abby and Lena, drawing strength from their presence. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, his legs felt weak, but he walked tall, refusing to let them see him stumble. As he passed the defendant's table, Derek muttered something under his breath. The judge's gavel cracked sharply. "One more outburst, Mr. Harrison, and you'll be held in contempt." Ethan took his seat beside Lena, who immediately squeezed his hand. Abby leaned across her lap to whisper, "You did it, Daddy." The prosecutor rose for her closing statement, presenting the evidence of premeditation, the pattern of harassment, the severity of the assault. She held up the threatening note in its evidence bag, pointed to the photos of Ethan's injuries, reminded the court of the security footage from the mall. The defense made their arguments, but they felt hollow in the face of such clear evidence. When the judge began speaking, the courtroom fell completely silent. Based on the evidence presented and the testimony heard today, I find probable cause to proceed with charges against all 4 defendants for aggravated assault, criminal threatening, and stalking." The gavel fell with a decisive crack. Bail is set at $50,000 each. Deputies, please take the defendants into custody. As the bailiffs moved forward with handcuffs, Derek's face twisted with rage. His friends looked stunned, as if they'd never actually expected consequences. The metal clinks of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet courtroom. "This isn't over," Derek snarled as they led him past. But it was over. Ethan watched as the deputies escorted all 4 men toward the holding area, their footsteps fading down the corridor. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of their power to intimidate. Lena leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, relief evident in every line of her body. Abby hugged them both, and for a moment, they just held each other, grateful for this ending and this beginning. The courtroom slowly emptied around them, but they stayed in their seats for a moment longer, letting the reality of safety sink in. The late afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, turning the dust motes to gold, promising better days ahead. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patches across the wooden floor where Ethan Cole sat in his favorite armchair. His bruises had faded from angry purple to softer yellows, but the deep ache in his ribs remained a constant reminder of that night in the parking lot. He adjusted the ice pack against his side, watching as Abby sprawled on her belly at the coffee table, surrounded by colored construction paper and markers. "Look, Daddy." She held up her latest creation, a card decorated with wobbly hearts and a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's you, me, and Lena." Ethan's heart swelled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is this one going on the wall with the others?" The living room wall had become a gallery of Abby's artwork. Dozens of get well cards formed a colorful collage, each one filled with her special brand of love and hope. Some featured superheroes, all bearing a striking resemblance to Ethan, while others contained Bible verses she'd carefully copied from her children's Bible. From the kitchen, the smell of chicken soup wafted through the house. Lena stood at the stove, stirring the pot with one hand while balancing a worn paperback in the other, a habit she couldn't seem to break. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, and wisps of hair had escaped her ponytail. "Soup's almost ready," she called out, marking her place in the book. "Abby, could you help set the table?" "Coming." Abby bounced up, carefully placing her latest masterpiece on the coffee table before skipping to the kitchen. Ethan watched them work together, their movements synchronized after weeks of settling into this new routine. Lena knew exactly which cabinet held the bowls Abby could reach, and Abby automatically grabbed the cloth napkins Lena preferred over paper ones. The sight made his chest tighten with emotion. Every morning, Lena arrived just after dropping off the early shift at the bookstore. She'd help get Abby ready for school, then spend her days alternating between caring for Ethan and working remotely on the bookstore's inventory system. The doctor had ordered 6 weeks of rest for Ethan's injuries to heal properly, and Lena had stepped in without hesitation. "Remember to take your medicine first," Lena reminded him as she ladled the soup into bowls. She'd memorized his medication schedule better than he had. They gathered around the kitchen table, steam rising from their bowls. Abby folded her hands automatically, and they bowed their heads for grace. It was Abby's turn to pray. "Dear God," she began, her voice serious, "thank you for helping Daddy get better every day. Thank you for Lena's yummy soup, and for making us a family again. And please help Daddy's ribs stop hurting so he can give proper hugs again. Amen." "Amen," Ethan and Lena echoed, exchanging gentle smiles across the table. As they ate, Abby chatted about her day at school, the spelling test she'd aced, the new girl who'd shared her cookies at lunch, and the upcoming class play she hoped to be in. Lena asked all the right questions, drawing out more details with genuine interest. "Mrs. Thompson says I might get to be the lead fairy," Abby announced proudly.
Will you both come to watch if I get the part?
"Wouldn't miss it for the world," Ethan assured her. "We'll be right in the front row," Lena added. After dinner, they moved to the living room for their evening ritual. Abby curled up next to Lena on the couch, while Ethan eased himself into his armchair. Lena opened the chapter book they'd been reading together, a story about a magical bookshop that Abby had picked out. As Lena read, her voice painting pictures of adventure and wonder, Ethan observed his daughter's rapt expression. Abby's eyes sparkled with imagination, just like her mother's used to. But now, instead of that sight bringing pain, it filled him with gratitude. They were building something new, something beautiful, without diminishing the precious memories of the past. The chapter ended too soon for Abby's liking, but bedtime rules were bedtime rules. She hugged Lena tight, then carefully gave Ethan a gentle hug, mindful of his injuries. "Night, Daddy." "Night, Lena," she called as she headed upstairs. Lena followed to help with teeth brushing and prayers, another part of their evening routine that had evolved naturally. Ethan listened to their muffled voices and quiet giggles floating down the stairs, a domestic symphony that made his house feel like a home again. When Lena returned, she sat on the couch with a contented sigh. She's getting better at remembering to floss. "You're magic with her," Ethan said softly. "With both of us, really." Lena ducked her head, modest as always. "You two make it easy. This feels right?" Ethan finished for her. She nodded, meeting his eyes. "Like I was meant to be here. Like everything that happened, even the scary parts, led to this." Ethan pushed himself carefully out of his chair and moved to sit beside her on the couch. The pain was worth it to be closer to her. The evening light painted everything in soft gold, making the moment feel somehow sacred. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulders touching, listening to the distant sound of crickets through the open window. The wall of Abby's artwork caught the last rays of sunset, each card a testament to healing and hope. "You know," Ethan said, reaching for Lena's hand across the coffee table, "you've given us back more than I ever dreamed." His voice was barely above a whisper, but the words carried the weight of his heart. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents filed in, clutching programs and searching for the best seats. Ethan Cole adjusted his tie nervously, following Lena down the narrow aisle to their reserved spots in the front row. His limp was barely noticeable now, just a slight hesitation in his step that served as a reminder of how far they'd come. "Look at all the butterflies," Lena whispered, pointing to the paper decorations hanging from the ceiling. The school's spring play, Garden of Dreams, had transformed the simple stage into a magical wonderland of cardboard flowers and twinkling lights. Ethan smiled, remembering how Abby had practiced her lines for weeks, twirling around their living room in her costume wings. She'd insisted on sleeping with them beside her bed, afraid they might disappear before the big night. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. The principal stepped onto the stage, welcoming everyone to the performance. Ethan reached for Lena's hand, finding comfort in its familiar warmth. The curtain rose slowly, revealing a garden scene. Children dressed as various flowers and insects moved across the stage, reciting their lines with endearing determination. Ethan's heart swelled as he spotted Abby, standing slightly stage left, her silvery wings catching the spotlight. She looked just like her mother when she smiled that way, bright and fearless. The butterfly wings on her back sparkled with every movement, sending little prisms of light dancing across the stage. Ethan blinked back tears, remembering how Lena had spent countless hours helping Abby decorate those wings with sequins and glitter. "She's beautiful," Lena whispered, squeezing his hand. Her eyes shone with pride, the same pride he'd seen when she helped Abby rehearse her lines or worked on her costume late into the night. Abby delivered her lines perfectly, her clear voice carrying across the auditorium. "In the Garden of Dreams, every flower has a story to tell. Every butterfly carries hope on its wings." She moved gracefully across the stage, just as they'd practiced in their backyard. Ethan thought about those practice sessions. Lena directing from the porch swing, Abby spinning through their flower beds, all three of them laughing when the sprinkler unexpectedly came on. These were the moments that had slowly knit them together, healing old wounds and creating new memories. The play continued, a sweet story about transformation and growth. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off his daughter, marveling at how she'd blossomed over these past months. The fear that had once shadowed her eyes after his attack had given way to a confident sparkle. As the final scene ended, the audience burst into enthusiastic applause. Parents rose to their feet, and Ethan stood proudly beside Lena, clapping until his hands hurt. Abby beamed from the stage, her eyes finding them in the crowd. After the curtain call, children poured into the audience, still in costume, seeking out their families. Abby ran toward them, her wings bouncing with each step. She crashed into Ethan's arms, and he lifted her high, ignoring the slight twinge in his still healing ribs. "Did you see me, Daddy? Did you see when I flew across the stage?" Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "You were amazing, sweetheart," he said, setting her down gently. "The most beautiful butterfly in the garden." Several of Abby's classmates gathered around, accompanied by their parents. One little girl pointed at Abby's wings, asking where she got them. Abby straightened up, her face glowing with pride as she gestured to her father and Lena.
"This is my daddy,"
she announced, taking Ethan's hand. Then, turning to Lena with a smile that illuminated the whole room, she added, "And this is the mommy God sent back to us." The simple truth in her words brought tears to everyone's eyes. Lena's hand flew to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Ethan wrapped one arm around her waist while keeping his other hand firmly in Abby's grasp. Parents nearby broke into spontaneous applause, touched by the pure love in Abby's declaration. Mrs. Thompson, Abby's teacher, wiped her eyes with a tissue, smiling warmly at the family. Ethan pulled both Abby and Lena close, forming a tight circle of embrace. He could feel Abby's wings pressing against him, the glitter now transferring to his suit jacket, but he didn't mind. Lena's tears soaked into his shoulder as she held them both. "Group hug," Abby declared, squeezing them tighter. Other children giggled, and a few parents snapped photos of the touching moment. Standing there, surrounded by love and acceptance, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He looked up toward the auditorium ceiling, past the paper butterflies and twinkling lights, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered softly. The words meant for both his late wife and God. Tears slid down his cheeks as he acknowledged how their story had come full circle. From the depths of loss, through valleys of fear, and finally to this mountain peak of joy, faith, family, and love had been reborn. Abby tugged at his sleeve, her wings slightly crooked now from all the hugging.
"Daddy, are you crying because you're happy?"
"Yes, sweetheart," he managed to say, brushing away tears. "These are definitely happy tears." Lena straightened Abby's wings with gentle hands, her own eyes glistening.
"Your mommy would be so proud of you tonight, honey."
"I know," Abby said with simple certainty. "She's watching us right now, isn't she?" "She sure is," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. He held his girls closer, these precious gifts who had restored his faith in love and possibility. The auditorium continued to buzz with activity around them, but for a moment they remained in their own world, father, daughter, and the woman who had helped make them whole again. Their circle of embrace was a testament to courage, to second chances, and to the mysterious ways that God could turn tragedy into triumph. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I hand-picked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.